All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest Jake Hinton. And Jake is a friend of mine, for full disclosure. And you know, Jake and I we're odd friends because we're very opposite in a lot of ways. You know, but we're good friends in the sense that we both are willing to agree to disagree. I like to put it that way. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's actually more healthy to get other people's opinions and listen to your friends and share mutual respect and share ideas. If you can't share ideas, then
Right.
you
I
know
mean,
what's the point?
yeah, how's the world going to change? So Jake and I, through our conversations, quite often have had discussions on science and the origin of, not science in general, but the origin of everything. Because Jake is coming from a Christian perspective, a perspective of religion, where I'm coming from a agnostic perspective, a perspective of, I don't know, I'm just going to listen to scientists. And first off, I guess I got to throw out that when I talk to Christians a lot of the time, I use the word religion, and they always go, ugh, like they don't like the term religion, and I don't understand what religion means that makes people sort of back off. Is it just too much of a blanket term? Is it like using the term myth, or what is it?
No, I have to say right off the bat, I wasn't really prepared for this question, but I'll address it. I think, and I'm only guessing, that a lot of people assume that a religion is really a system of do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm.
And at least, and I can't speak to, say, the Muslim religion or the Hindu religion or Mormons or anything else like that. But I can tell you, as far as Christians go, the do's and don'ts list is separate from whether or not there's actually salvation there, like whether or not you're actually saved, whether or not you actually have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so it could be that people are trying to make that distinction. Of course, there's an element in Christianity. There's the Ten Commandments, which are important to Christians, which you know are there, but it's almost a separate thing, because we all have to admit that we're sinners and we all break the Ten Commandments, whether or not we want to. And so religion and that saving, that salvation aspect, they're pretty separate to a lot of Christians. So that might be why the people you've spoken with
That makes
bristled
sense.
at that.
That makes sense. Right.
I can't speak for them necessarily.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, basically, our discussion is mainly about creationism versus evolution. And to me, it's weird when people talk about this, because here are the two sides. Maybe there are other sides, but let's just pretend like there's two for the sake of discussion.
Okay.
And that is, both people on both sides seem to be like, well, it's obvious, you know? So to me, evolution is quite obvious, you know? So why would one, I don't know. Like, when you hear evolution, what do you think? What do you take from
Well, I think it's complex. I think somehow it's more and less complex than most people give it credit for, all at the same time. And I totally agree and appreciate what you said, is that on both sides they think it's obvious. And I think that people tend to have this idea like, well, it's obvious, this is obvious to me, therefore if someone believes this, they're clearly stupid.
that?
Well, and I think a lot of people fall into that trap.
Totally.
I'm smart because this is obvious to me, and people who disagree are stupid. I don't think that's really the case. I think this is a complex matter enough that there's smart people on both sides, and there's stupid people on both sides too. I hope I'm one of the smart guys, but hey,
Yeah, well,
it's hard to say.
I hope I'm smart enough to play. I definitely know there are smarter ones. But
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So when Are they mutually exclusive, in your opinion?
No, not necessarily. I mean, so, and dude, like there's so many layers to this. You mentioned creationism. I was actually preparing for a talk on intelligent design,
Mhm.
which intelligent design and creationism are actually two different things. Intelligent design
Right.
doesn't necessarily invoke a deity, and creationism, usually if someone uses the word creationism, they're referring to the creation story in Genesis of the Bible.
Right.
So I was actually coming in to have a discussion about intelligent design, but I can have either discussion. I'm pretty comfortable with both of them.
Well, I just to me it's all the same,
Okay.
because I don't have a big understanding. But when you put it that way, I get it. Creationism. So would a creationist be one of the people who think that the world is 6,000 years old?
So again,
I don't
totally off the subject that I was ready for,
know.
but
Sorry.
as luck would have it, I know this.
Uh-huh.
So there are several different schools of thought with the Genesis creation story.
Mhm.
There's people called the young earth people, which
Okay,
are
I've
what
heard
you
that
just
term.
described,
Yeah.
and the old earth. And I think there's like two others. But really, if you take a look at the creation story, and this is what a lot of theologians that I've spoken with or that I've heard speak about this agree on, is that if you take Genesis as a whole, the creation story is really only the first few chapters of that. And if you look at it, it's really bizarre. It's a poem. The whole thing is a poem that actually starts in the beginning, goes to the middle, goes to the beginning again. And in the ancient Jewish way of thinking, and in English, poetry means it rhymes. If you're Jewish, ancient Jewish, poetry is symmetry. So they actually attempt to achieve symmetry even in the storylines. So if you look at maybe movies from Bollywood, they often have bizarre timelines.
Mhm.
That's art over there. And in the exact same way that that's art, poetry in the ancient Jewish um, way of thinking about it is their story, their plot lines go beginning, middle, beginning, or beginning, middle, end, middle, beginning. And
Right.
it's that symmetry that creates it. And they do it in the story, they do it in their sentences, in their paragraphs, even in trying to get the words to be symmetrical, like the word race car in
Mhm.
English can go
Right.
forwards or backwards. They
Right.
attempt to achieve that. That's their way of poetry. So when you look at it in that way, then to literally translate Genesis becomes very difficult because things happen completely out of order. I mean, it talks about daytime before it talks about the sun being created. I don't think the author of Genesis messed that up. It's
Right.
simply an expression of art.
Right.
And so that's why you have a lot of disagreement with young earthers, old earthers, and there's a couple other variations I don't really know.
Okay.
But the
Well, that
old
makes
earthers would
sense.
say, hey, if God created the earth, and the reference here is a day. God created earth in a day. He created this in a day. He created this in a day. No one was really there. A day is a celestial period of time that the earth goes around the sun, right?
Right.
So if this whole thing is not even established yet, what is a day when God is creating everything?
Right.
Or is God using whatever kind of
Terms that
timeline he
people
wants?
understand.
Yeah.
Right.
So what do they call that? Anthropomorphism,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
that you have a work day, but what is a work day to God when you
Right.
have unlimited power?
Well, in this current day and age, a workday is like 2, 3 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, seriously. Middle of the COVID crisis here.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So intelligent design. So let me try to pull this around to that.
Okay.
The so science believes that we can track basically not everything, but the basic idea of how energy and matter has moved throughout the universe all the way back to about like 13 seconds or 1/13th of a second after the Big Bang. We don't know what the universe looked like prior to that, but that's how far back they go. So I think for the sake of argument, I'm not going to go before the Big Bang,
Okay. Fair enough.
because I mean, who knows? Um, but in intelligent design, why don't you huck me an example and I will see if I think that represents intelligent design? Because, science in general, I say we like I'm a scientist, but I'm representing that side here. We look at it like that everything is bumping around, So
yeah. So
what would your opening argument to that be?
The opening argument to everything just bumping around?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess what I would say is there's really, and this is the part that is shockingly simple to me, that there's really only three working theories to the origin of life question. Theory one is what's called the chance hypothesis. Theory two is called the necessity hypothesis. Theory three is the intelligent design hypothesis. So those are your three options as far as most origin of life scientists are concerned. Those are the only three.
It sounds like I'm coming from number one, which is chance.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like number two would really kind of be intelligent design too.
No, so I'll explain each one. So the chance hypothesis, you already understand. It's the whole bouncing around and life coming out of that. I'll talk about intelligent design too. So it's a really simple one. The intelligent design hypothesis says that something intelligent created the first life. And then what I said was in the middle, the necessity hypothesis would be some law-like force. So for an example, magnets stick to my fridge. That's a force.
Yeah.
And so the necessity argument, and you could say that, yeah, there's some chance involved in the necessity argument, but basically necessity argument says that there's laws at play within the universe that cause all these things to happen, and it was inevitable. It had to happen based on the laws that are observed.
In order for there to be a universe.
So specifically, those three are for the first life, original.
Right, but the second one, the necessity, it's like if we didn't have the electromagnetic force, the universe wouldn't exist the way that we see it. And so necessity is basically saying if there isn't life, then we wouldn't see it. Like there's a lot of people like going around like talking about how consciousness defines reality, therefore life would be necessary for reality to exist.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty philosophically deep.
But I don't know. I'm not ready to go there. So I'm looking at So
here's a super good example.
See, the third one is the one that just doesn't make sense to me, though.
So then let's go over them. Yeah. The necessity hypothesis, a good way to explain that is like a salt crystal. So before we get too deep into it, like most evolutionists believe that, so we're humans, and due to random chance variations occurring in DNA, we come from apes.
Right.
And so those apes came from some lesser life form and lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser until the point where you get to the first cell. And even the first cell is a pretty complicated thing, so you have to get even smaller. And the thing scientists agree was even smaller is the first protein. And what a protein is an ordered set of amino acids. So when you're talking about the first life, you have to go that far back and look at, and so when people say the prebiotic soup, that's what they're saying was in the prebiotic soup was amino acids. That's the starting point for evolutionary biology, is that prebiotic soup. And so when I'm talking about these three theories, that's really the starting point.
Okay.
So chance hypothesis says the prebiotic soup, so you have this ocean of amino acids. By the way, there are 20 amino acids that create the proteins within all human cells. So that's the material you're starting with is those 20 amino acids. There's actually many more, but only 20 of them exist in cells. So the chance hypothesis is in that prebiotic soup. They're all bouncing around together, and you get the first two to click together in a way. They would kind of have some sort of a magnetic attraction, and then the next one would come, and the next one, and the next one. And so scientists, through their experiments, have determined that to get the first functioning protein, and so what they've done is they've taken proteins they found in cells, and I mean, they're super complex things, and they start knocking things out of them. So you might have a protein with several thousand amino acids that create it, and they start knocking these amino acids out to see, okay, will it function if I take this away? Will it function if I take this away? So they don't know exactly at how small they can get it, but there's a working theory in science right now that if you can get that protein down to 150 amino acids, that's the very smallest unit of protein that you can possibly have, that it can still perform a function. And when I say function, I mean it's literally that. Like a protein within a cell might perform the function of a hammer, which is crazy to think about. There's actually tools inside your cells that do things, and they're folded amino acids into proteins that do things like a hammer. There's also one, by the way, that has legs and walks along a highway inside your cell, which is creepy to think about. I have things walking around in my cells. So that's where they're starting. Okay, so we have this 150 amino acid protein. That's the genesis. That's the biogenesis that we have to have. So chance hypothesis, that 150 amino acid protein formed by accident. Necessity says some law-like force, like maybe it was gravity and heat and some magnetic force clicked those 150 amino acids together to create the first protein, or and of course the third one, no, an intelligent designer actually put those 150 proteins together. And so what a lot of people say, and a lot of people in your camp are saying, is, okay, but that's not science. Like, chance hypothesis is science, and the necessity hypothesis is science. Intelligent design is not science. I disagree. So in all historic...
Let me throw this in. I would disagree too, because although you can't prove a negative, I mean, you can't just exclude something because you don't like it. You know, it's like... But go ahead and continue. Yeah.
Sure. And so going all the way back, and I'm going like back to the 1600s, 1700s, scientific philosophies, they compare inductive reasoning to abductive reasoning, or historical sciences to theoretical sciences and experimental sciences. So, for example, the guy who determined that there were invisible wavelengths of light, he literally had light come in. He's measuring the energy because, like, the sun shined into his lab. He measures the energy. Then he puts a prism there in front of that beam of light. Now he's broken the light into all the different spectrums, and he's measuring the energy and says, gosh, there's energy missing. He puts his thermometer outside of that visible light and measures energy there. So he's just discovered an invisible spectrum of light. And of course, there's one on the other side. It's infrared and ultraviolet. But that's just a really perfect example of someone doing an experiment in their lab, making a discovery, and that's a very repeatable thing, right? Once he writes about it and publishes it, then other scientists around the world can read that and do the exact same thing and say, yeah, you're right. There is really energy on both sides of my light spectrum. So that's a valid discovery. So that's, and I get these confused, but I think that's the abductive reasoning. So you've just done science in your lab. It's a repeatable experiment. You know how to do it. But then there's something else that the historical sciences really depend on. And just to give you an example of that, we believe that the dinosaurs went extinct due to a meteor strike on the Earth. We cannot recreate the meteor strike that we're referring to in a laboratory. We can't run the experiment over and over again. We can't, do anything like, there's no experiments. All we can do is say, well, we know that a meteor strike would create a certain uniform ash layer on the Earth. We also know that, based on the fossil record we're seeing, we think that most of the dinosaurs died at approximately the same time. So what what could have happened. So we see that effect and we think, okay, what are all the things that can happen? Well, there could be a gigantic forest fire. There could be a meteor strike. There could be volcanic stuff, some cataclysmic thing. But when we look at all the evidence, only one thing really matches all the evidence, and that is the meteor strike. Part of that is the fact that there's a big crater on like the Yucatan Peninsula or something,
Right.
which they believe was the actual strike. And of course,
The
volcanic
layer of
eruptions.
ash and the strata, and they
Yeah,
put it together. Right.
exactly. And so, but you could also say, well, look, a volcano might also make a layer of ash. That's true. The volcano accounts for one of the things we see, but the meteor strike accounts for a lot more of the things we see. Mainly that giant crater we see. A volcano would not create that. A
Right.
meteor would.
Mm-hmm.
So that's called inference to the best explanation. You've got several things that it could be, but only one thing really explains it well.
Hence the deductive, like Sherlock Holmes, and the abductive would be the repeatable science.
There's three: abductive, inductive, and what was the third one you said?
Deductive.
Deductive. Yeah. So Sherlock Holmes, deductive, abductive, and inductive are the two that we're referring to. And I always get them mixed up.
No, I don't blame you.
Yeah. So when you consider that, so when we consider the fact that first of all, there's two different kinds of sciences.
Mm-hmm.
There's the ones you can do in the lab, and then there's the reference to the best explanation. What we're looking at here
is reference to the best explanation.
Reference to the best explanation, yeah. So now you've got those three theories, and you know the kind of science you have to use going forward. So let's take a look at the three theories again. And so I kind of want to apologize for going into this, but it has to happen.
Okay.
It's the only thing I can do. So once, and I'll get there in a sec. So once Darwin created the origin of once he wrote the origin of the species, what he was saying was that natural selection is the reason we see evolution in all the species on the earth today. What he didn't go into was the book was never written for the first life, the origin of life. He was talking, because remember, in order for the changes to occur, there has to be generations.
Mm-hmm.
So natural selection chooses the best out of the generation to send forward. Well, the first life couldn't have had a past generation. So Darwinian evolution doesn't speak to the first life. And Darwin himself says that very clearly. Like, look, and he wrote this in that, what was it, 1850, I think? It was 1850. Yeah, he published it in 1850. He says right there, look, you really, science today cannot speak to anything within the cell. It cannot speak to the origin of life. All I can speak to today is what I can observe. And what he was observing was, the animals he saw on Earth and the changes that he saw in those animals over generations. So let's go to the chance hypothesis for the first life, which is one of the reasons why I've decided that the intelligent design hypothesis is the winner. Mm-hmm. So before I start this, I need to make a reference to the numbers I'm going to be going over. So I'm going to be using numbers that are 10 to the power of. Mm-hmm. And to give you an example of that, there are 10 to the power of 80 elementary particles in the observable universe. So 10 and then a little hypertext 80, which is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 80 times.
Right.
Yeah. So elementary particles, that's electrons, neutrons, protons. There are 10 to the 80th power elementary particles in the observable universe. Okay. So how do you calculate the chance hypothesis? Well, to do this, we need to start by that first 150 amino acid protein, but there's 20 different amino acids that could click in any one place. And they don't actually click together in any order. In fact, they readily click together in any order. They don't care. There's no preference in the way they click together. So the chance hypothesis states that if there's enough of them banging against one another over enough time, then surely it's bound to happen.
Sure. Like the idea of taking a box of puzzle pieces and hucking them on the ground and it building a puzzle.
Yeah, or like a yacht. If you roll the dice enough time, you're going to get a Yahtzee.
Right.
So all we're looking for, all we're doing is creating a bigger Yahtzee game.
Mm-hmm.
So to calculate out, there's a scientist. What the hell? I don't remember the scientist's name. Bill Dembski. That's who it was. So Bill Dembski is a mathematician and a scientist, and he decided he would just calculate all this out. I mean, why not?
Sure.
But there's a problem, and a lot of people have done this before him, like a lot of people. And the problem everyone runs into is they create this calculation, and then people say, well, yeah, but you didn't really factor in this. What if this? What if that? And that usually occurs after someone has said, we calculated the mass of the prebiotic soup on Earth. Mm-hmm. Well, to avoid those arguments, he just gave the chance hypothesis the best possible chance ever. And here's how he did it. He decided he would make every elementary particle in the observable universe something that could help create that 150 amino acid protein. Mm-hmm. And then he said, let's just assume they were all moving at the speed of light to give them the maximum number of interactions with each other. And yeah, so how would we calculate all of that out? And so what he said was there have been 10 to the 16th power seconds from the Big Bang to today. And there are 10 to the negative 43rd seconds, or rather, a single event can't take place faster than light can traverse that smallest measurable unit of distance. That's the thing that I explained a second ago. So the unit of distance, that's called the Planck length, and it's 10 to the negative 33rd power of centimeters. So the time it takes light to traverse that is 10 to the negative 43rd seconds. So knowing all this, you can multiply the three factors. So the number of elementary particles in the universe, 10 to the 80th power, times the number of seconds since the Big Bang, 10 to the 16th power, times the number of interactions that could possibly occur in each second, 10 to the negative 43rd power. So if you calculate all of those together, the total number of events that could have taken place in the observable universe is 10 to the 139th power. And a lot of people have come up with this. It wasn't just Bill Dembski. Different people always come up with different numbers, but they're all about the same. They're all very restrictive. Excuse me. So 10 to the 139th power is such an astronomical number, it's almost impossible for a human brain to think about. Remember, like I said, elementary particles is 10 to the 80th power, right? So we're several times more than the most elementary particles in the observable universe. And so, but remember, we're assuming there's other things. And by the way, that's called the statistical resources. Those are the resources that it has to create this thing. So we're wondering, okay, that number, great. That's a really giant number that no one really understands. No one can really comprehend that number. What does it mean for the chances of 150 amino acid protein occurring at any point in the universe? So you can calculate that out too. And so what you're calculating is the chance of the chance hypothesis. So let's assume that the chance of the chance hypothesis being better than 50-50. So if I were to flip a coin, I got a 50-50 chance of it landing on heads or tails. So let's say I want a better than 50-50 chance of something happening. The calculation is that the universe would have to rebuild itself 1 trillion times to give itself the opportunities to have a decent chance at creating that 150 amino acid protein. So we've gone through one game, but we need to play a trillion games to have a good chance of creating that first 150 amino acid protein. So that being said, there is something in statistical science called an exclusion zone. So we've all seen the bell curve,
Mhm.
and like the peak of the bell is the thing that's most likely to happen. And as you go off the edge, those are the things that are less and less likely to happen. So really far out, there's something called an exclusion zone, which is the thing that's so far out that there's really no point in making a calculation out there because it just doesn't make any sense. You can't do it. It would be like measuring how high everyone in a certain town can jump.
Right.
At some point, once you get over 3 or 4 feet, now you've got your outliers, your basketball players who might be able to jump 4 or 5 feet, but you wouldn't say they could jump 40 or 50 feet. They'd die when they landed. But also, you that's called an exclusion zone in
Right.
statistics.
But
And so,
mathematically or statistically, taken outside of the realm of humanness, it's still in the realm of possibility. It's just so far out there that when we're deducing, it basically is cut off.
yeah. And so when you consider that the universe having to completely restart a trillion times, and you consider the inference to the best explanation, you have to ask the question, well, is that still the best explanation? And that's kind of where I started making my decision. I should add, like, I haven't thought this way my whole life, by the way. I went to public school. I learned that there's no other thing but evolution. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s and started reading further into it that I saw that not only do a lot of people disagree on this, but actually a lot of scientists, very high up scientists, disagree on this too. In the 1980s, scientists actually gathered the top minds in science, and they're like, hey, how are we going to proceed with this? Because this is really prohibitive to the idea that life arose by chance. Like, so prohibitive that we should probably consider other options. And a lot of scientists agree, like, that number is real and it's a tough pill to swallow. So suddenly you've got the chance hypothesis perhaps not being the best explanation, which is the thing we're trying to go for. Then, so do you have any questions about that first? I mean, there was a lot of big
No,
numbers, and it's
no, but I get the idea. We laid it out there that we're dealing with deductive, and there comes a point where you have to exclude ideas, and the term astronomical is normally, like, when you talk about time, you talk about geological time and astronomical time, that
yeah,
the term astronomical is still too small to apply to the size of the numbers that we're dealing with.
yeah,
That these numbers are so large that it's outside of the realm of deduction. Now, I mean, one could easily make the argument like, hey, it's still possible. Of course it's
yeah.
still possible, but I do get where you're going with this. But, you know, I guess science would say that you can prove by solely disproving. That's a lot of what deductive reasoning is. But is there any proving?
Is there any proving? No, and that's the crazy thing. You simply cannot go back and prove it.
Mhm.
That's the biggest. You could say that, hey, you're saying 1 in a trillion. It's like Lloyd in Dumb and Dumber saying, so you're telling me there's a chance to marry, that
Mhm.
comedy. Yeah. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
so you can never, and so Mary's like, looks at Lloyd like he's kind of an idiot, but you can never, no, you can never go back and completely disprove. But when you consider what you're giving up to hold on to that, if for me it was just too much.
Mhm.
And so as I was making this decision, I was thinking I would totally go the other direction, by the way. Um, and I didn't. I just couldn't possibly. A lot of people say, and on both sides probably, you're an evolutionist might say, well, a creationist or an intelligent design proponent is being ignorant to the facts. I would say, given that fact, you could say the exact same thing. Uh, you're being ignorant to the fact that that's a very tiny thing. And I don't say that, by the way. I mean, frankly, a lot of, like we said earlier, a lot of smart people are on both sides of this.
Yes, of
But
course.
yeah, for me, I couldn't really come to swallow that pill, and so I just it was a little bit liberating for me to not have to swallow it, to say, nah, I just can't go with it.
It's interesting because for me, I've always, and I think a lot of people who belong to the religion of science, because by our discussion earlier, the definition of religion, I mean, science is definitely one. We got a set of rules,
There you go, a set of rules and clergy.
Right? Yeah. I always associated intelligent design with religion. To me, there was no separation between the two, and obviously I started out this conversation thinking that, but now that we're here, I get what you're saying, and they are not mutually exclusive. One can believe in one, the other, or any combination of the above.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, and I should add, I can't remember if it was Hitchens or Dawkins. Both of them are pretty staunch atheists, and one of them passed away maybe like 10 years ago. But before he passed away, he was pressed on this issue of the likelihood of this happening. And at the end of the conversation, he was like, "Okay, well, all I can maybe it was just aliens." Like that was his next logical step, was to say, well, if it's not chance, then it's aliens, which is that's the direction he wanted to go. So yeah, I mean, who am I to say he shouldn't? He's a smart guy. He was a smart guy too. He passed away, like I said.
Well, sure. Arguably, I mean, maybe the universe is but a cell in a larger petri dish of,
right.
Maybe we're some macro versus COVID-19.
Yeah.
I mean,
and again,
spreading.
I mean, and I like, I've had conversations with people who said maybe to a lot of things. Again, and I think they're fun conversations to have, but inference to the best explanation. And people talk about the multiverse, the bubble bath theory, which is the same as the multiverse theory. That's fine, and physicists are having that conversation today for sure. But really, there's zero evidence to support a multiverse theory, and not only that, there's zero. No one has any hope that we would ever determine that, because no one has any idea how we would try to prove something beyond the green curtain that we call the universe. We just don't know how to get there. And maybe tearing space-time, all these other ideas, which are all great. They're just not going to happen, certainly in our lifetime or the next 100 lifetimes of scientists, probably. But that brings us, there's still one more that we haven't really talked about, the necessity hypothesis. And the necessity hypothesis is like, okay, well, if chance can't do it, then, we see salt crystals form. That's a highly ordered structure. And which is what a protein is too. It's a highly ordered structure. It's what's called specified complexity. So it's complex and it's specific. If it lacks either one of those things, it can't perform the function it needs to function. So all the sand particles in the Sahara Desert, those would be considered highly complex, because you could probably never rebuild it in the position they're in right now. It's too complex. There's too many grains of sand, but it's not specified. It's not like it spells words. It doesn't recite one of Lincoln's speeches. There's no specification to it. It's just extremely complex. So what a protein is a specified complex thing. Not only is it complex, but it performs a function like a tool. So the chance hypothesis says, well, I'm sorry, the necessity hypothesis says that it had to do this, just like a salt crystal has to create a lattice structure because of the negatively and positively charged ions that create it. And so that was kind of, so once the chance hypothesis, so by the way, all of this, and I'm going back into history now, all of this scientific discussion I'm talking about right now occurred after 1953, after Watson and Crick elucidated the double helix structure in DNA. Because before that, we had no idea. Darwin, he had no idea what a cell was. He just thought it was a round thing with a round thing in the middle. That's as much as scientists knew about cells. They knew they were important. They knew they were probably, excuse me, the elementary building blocks of life, but that was it. Like that's the end. So in the 1950s, a full 100 years after Darwin published his book, we suddenly realize, holy cow, inside a cell is a double helix structure. That double helix structure contains actual information, a code that tells the cell what to do. That was totally, that blew everybody's mind. No one knew anything about this. And so once people realized that, that's when the chance hypothesis suffered. Before that, no one had any idea. The chance hypothesis made a ton of sense because no one knew that was an unlikely event for a cell to just occur out of nothing. So that's when people started switching over to the necessity hypothesis. And the necessity hypothesis, like I said, says that they have to link together by some law-like force. However, in the 70s, so this is 20 years after the elucidation of DNA, people started really coming to grips with all the pieces and parts and how they were composed and how they were created. And they're realizing, in fact, in the 1990s, a guy named, what the heck was his name? Stephen Meyer published a paper that said, okay, we've been thinking this way this whole time, but look, everyone says that the information was created because, and I'm just going to use the letters as an example, that people say, well, maybe the T in DNA always attracts the G and the C and the A and the T and the G and the C and the A. In fact, there is no bond between the letters. The bond is on the spine, the outside spine of the DNA. That's what it's attracted to. It has nothing to do. It would be like, excuse me, the magnetic letters that you put on your fridge. They only stick to the fridge. They don't actually stick to one another. So the idea that you're saying, well, this code had to create this, no. The letters can be rearranged and they have no preference on this axis. They only want to stick to that thing. And so the chance hypothesis actually falls apart in a DNA first world. But then people say, well, okay, what if it wasn't the DNA that was not the first thing? What if it was the protein? So, and it actually gets much worse when you do it that way. So a protein, if you were just to put all those things together, that's fine. But remember, for a cell to replicate, you have to pull it apart. You have to copy all the parts, take them to another machine. That machine has to build it, and then that original one has to go back together. Proteins are incapable of doing that. If you unfold a protein, what it does is that's called denaturing a protein when you unfold it. Unfortunately, when you unfold it, it opens. We've all been watching these things with like the COVID-19 virus. It's got those little knobs.
Right.
So those knobs attach to other things. A protein does the same thing. It's got these knobs, and as soon as they're open, as soon as they're exposed, it's super unstable, and it clicks to another protein, the first one it can find. For an example of this, I denature proteins every Saturday morning when I cook my eggs. When you cook eggs, the proteins unfold and they click together, and that's what turns it from a liquid to a solid, which essentially ruins it as far as trying to create something functional because it's just become a globule. It attached to everything. Conversely, DNA is completely inert. You can open it up, it doesn't do anything, and then close it right back together. And it maintains what it's supposed to do, which is store and then transmit information when it's unzipped. So that's kind of one of the problems that the necessity hypothesis runs into. And there's one final issue that both chance and necessity run into, which is really interesting, is the whole time we've had this discussion so far, what I've been talking about creating is a 150 amino acid protein. That's the simplest protein we know of that can still function as something. Still, and the hope is for people who believe in this theory is that if we can create that first functional protein, then maybe something would happen where it would kind of hobble along and it would begin to build itself up and maybe build a new protein, and then a simple cell would form. But there's a problem with that. And here's the problem. Proteins won't form by chance for the reasons we already went over. They need the information in DNA. So DNA, that code, it's unraveled. Something called a tRNA molecule or a transfer ribonucleic acid, which is a special vehicle that unfolds the DNA. It records the code inside and then closes the DNA back up. Now it's got that recorded DNA. It looks like a blimp in the cell, and it's attached to a tiny little thing with legs that runs along a highway, and the highway is dynamic. It changes depending on where the thing needs to go. And it goes to a protein factory on the outskirts of the cell. So it leaves the nucleus of the cell towards the outside. It walks all the way along that highway to that protein factory. It unzips again, and then the tRNA is transferred into a amino acid, the 20 alphabet amino acid coding machine, and that puts them together and folds them into their proper structure so that they're stable, to make sure they're not going to click or link to anything they're not supposed to. One sec. So now scientists have this question. If the DNA holds the code to create the protein and the transfer RNA needs to be there to transfer the DNA to the protein machine, the protein folding machine, which one of those things came first? Was it the protein? Was it the transfer RNA? Was it the DNA? Or was it the factory that actually creates it? No matter where you go, the factory that makes it was coded by the DNA. The DNA was created by the factory. The transfer RNA needs both of those things either to be created or to create anything else. All three of these machines use hundreds of proteins. We were trying to make one, and we saw that it was nearly impossible by chance. Every one of these machines requires hundreds of functionally specific proteins, and the 150 was the smallest. Most of them have several thousand amino acids and would be completely out of the realm of possibility to generate any other way. So you have this chicken and egg problem that's almost impossible. These three interconnected systems, each one depending on one another, just to create a new generation of cell. So just to create the thing that's needed for natural selection. Remember, natural selection requires the generation. If there's no generation, there's no natural selection, because the cell it dies, it's destroyed. Cells have a lifespan, and they won't live forever. So it's an interesting conundrum, and neither the chance hypothesis can address it, nor can why can't I think of this all morning? Necessity hypothesis. Yeah. It doesn't address the issue either. They both do their best to address the first tiniest possible protein, neither one considering what a cell actually needs to self-replicate, which is several hundred very complex and interconnected systems.
Yeah. That is wild, and it does make sense as far as intelligent design, and it is a little more palatable to me, with its removal from the religious part that it's been very much put into for, I'm by no means stupid, but I'm by no means hugely educated on the topic, obviously, but it just shows you that the general knowledge that people have of this, I think they probably have the two put together.
Probably. Oh yeah. And it's funny when I watch different people discuss this, and it seems to me people want to put that together. I watched one. It was a news article. The guy was being interviewed, and the nightly news guy was talking to the guy who was a proponent for intelligent design, and the news guy was like, "Well, what you're talking about is religion," and the intelligent design theorist said, "No, I mean religion is this, 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 and this. I'm talking about a scientific inference to the best explanation based on what we're observing inside the cell. Mm-hmm. That's it." But the news guy, he was the one who was really trying to make the connection, and the intelligent designer was like, "No, don't make the connection. You're accusing me of something. You don't even know what I believe in that way. You're just assuming." Interestingly, I think, the point I was trying to make is, it's a lot. Oftentimes, the people who don't like intelligent design or don't like religion trying to put the two together, even though a lot of intelligent design proponents don't actually consider the two things together at all. Just they consider them separate.
Hmm. So that does leave us in the realm, though, of the fun speculation is designed by whom, of course, or what. The other side of the speculation is it's relative, but we're also intelligent.
Yeah.
So we could intelligently create life.
That's true. In fact, I got to bring up one other point. So the system, the interconnected system I brought up earlier, of the DNA, which stores the information, the transfer RNA, which turns that code into a different code, takes it to the factory, and the factory creates the protein. What's interesting is human beings created the exact same system to a frightening, freakish degree, and it's CAD-CAM. So if you were to go to the Boeing factory today, you would see a computer storing the information. It goes from the computer coding language to a different coding language and carried in the wires to a machine on the other side of the Boeing factory, which is putting a plane together in a certain way. So it's freaky how similar those two systems are. And just like you said, if human beings built the Boeing factory, what built us? They're so similar. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Maybe I'm an intelligent designer. I didn't know. Well, no, I'm serious. I mean, it's like I definitely can see that there might be some holes in the necessity one. The ways that they're drawn to the item. You're saying that the Gattaca letters. I'm a movie fan, so of course I love Gattaca. Yeah. The Gattaca letters are adhered to the spine, basically not by one another, but by the spine calling them in. So maybe the spine's calling them in a necessity way.
So that was a theory, but there's no preference. So in order to do that, so the spine has only two molecules, sugar and phosphorus, on that spine, both of them, and the chemical bond between the DNA base pairs and the sugar phosphorus spine is always a hydrogen bond. So in fact, no, there's no possible way for that hydrogen bond to have an affinity to one or the other.
Damn it! I was onto something.
Yeah, so that was it's a logical next question.
You're right,
and that's what scientists ask that question. Well, is there an affinity between the sugar phosphate molecules on the spine and the base pairs? There's not. It's the exact same bond on every pair. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. The other argument that I was thinking for the necessity is very speculative and abstract, but I might as well go there because if you're if anybody's out there listening to Radio Wasteland, they're probably speculative and abstract.
They're maybe a little out there. That's okay.
Right, yeah. Is that okay? So it'd have to happen trillions of times. So the idea that so there's the Big Bang, and then how does the world end? Is there the big crunch or the big freeze? So now we think that it's the big freeze. That basically the idea is the Big Bang, it blows up, it sucks back in, is the big crunch, it happens again and again and again. But now we say, hey, there's the big freeze. So one idea for the necessity is that when they think about consciousness influencing the existence of the universe, maybe the Big Bang was the big crunch so many times, and then once consciousness happened, that's what's causing space to expand faster than the speed of light, therefore the big freeze. Like, it did keep happening until life happened, and then life pushes away from one another on some level, and now this is the end. We fulfilled what the mechanism does.
Yeah, so I love the fact that you brought up the big crunch and the big freeze. I was always a fan of that. In fact, I recall sitting in my high school science class and my teacher explaining the big crunch. And it just so happened that like the night before I had watched Nova on KIXE,
Ooh,
and they had
whoops.
been talking, and they had been talking about the fact that they discovered the red shift in the 60s, which is the expansion of the wavelength of light because of the acceleration
Yeah,
of the
that
universe outward.
kind of like the Doppler thing, where it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah,
Spectral Dopplering. And so as my science teacher, he's saying this, I'm like, I just watched Nova last night, and it said the exact opposite of what you're saying. So, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. But I mean, so you're implying that maybe the fact that consciousness did arise in this universe is the thing that's forcing the big freeze and
yeah,
avoiding the big crunch, and that it's possible that the universe had sampled a trillion times before
right,
now.
right.
I mean, I
Now I realize it's
I
purely
can't
speculative.
dispute it.
Right, yeah, totally. Recreate that in the lab,
Mm-hmm.
right. Yeah. But it is interesting because the chance, let's think about this. Because if we can create life, it does take us from the deductive into the abductive or inductive. Because if we can create the life, we can recreate it in a lab. But
Yeah,
it
I mean,
also proves intelligent design if we do it.
yeah, exactly right. Like we're using what we can observe to determine what we can't observe. That's the logic and the reasoning behind it. And if it's the best explanation, which is why I decided to go over the chance and the other hypothesis there.
Right. Yeah, that is just absolutely wild, mind bending, and it makes so much sense. And really, what I like about it is the fact that it
Can I?
separates from, like I keep going back to, but it separates from religion what I thought. It adds depth to what I viewed as being no depth.
Yeah, and I should add, so like that idea is not lost on most people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a radio interview that I heard, it was a long time ago, and I couldn't even get into the specifics. It was so long ago. But essentially, the person who was talking was an evolutionary biologist. He was a proponent of the chance hypothesis, and the radio interviewer was not. And he point blank asked a question. So, you know that there's a low chance of probability here. Why make that decision? And the evolutionary biologist was actually very honest in his answer. He said, "I don't like the implications of an intelligent designer, because I mean, let's face it, the
Yeah,
you like the idea of separating religion and intelligent design, but why? There's implications to religion and not intelligent design. And intelligent design, you can make that whoever you want to. If
because I don't
it's
want to
intelligent,
accidentally worship some intergalactic squid monster. That's my answer. Just
yeah,
because there's one, it now leads to the next discussion as to who.
yeah,
You know,
that's the
and
question.
was it for the right reasons? I mean,
Yeah,
we create. Here we are. We're all in our houses right now, and there's plenty of theorists out there who think that Bill Gates created this virus so that he could microchip us all and stuff like that. So intelligent design does not imply necessarily goodness. I mean,
God,
it doesn't
right?
imply God. It could be evil. We could have been created for purely evil purposes,
So
and we
you could,
just don't understand them. The virus doesn't know what the hell it's doing.
yeah. Somebody's got a giant magnifying glass getting ready right now.
Yeah,
My lab is ready. I can cook them all.
one of our hardcore bonding things that you and I have is a love of movies, and I think it's the end of Men in Black 2, where the universe is a marble that the giant squid monsters are playing with.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like, I don't know.
That I think that was Men in Black 1,
Was it?
not 2. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's mind blowing when I saw that. I'm just all like, of course, any science fiction fan had thought of it, but for them to put it into visual, digestible terms, I'm just all like, oh,
Yeah, and just to full disclosure, the movie I thought I would bring up during this period of time was Prometheus,
mm,
where you actually have the engineer going down to Earth and destroying his own body, seeding the Earth with um, his own DNA and
Right.
basically creating everything with his own stuff. And the question that the scientist in that movie asks is, okay, fine, who created the creator?
Right.
What,
Who engineered the engineer? Absolutely. And can you ever get to the end of it? One of my YouTube channels that I like following is the Fermi Labs, and they put out these videos like of people asking questions about. My most recent one is like what happened before the Big Bang, and like this guy's like, I don't know, but let's go back as far as we possibly can. And he explains background radiation and why we can go so far back and so on and so forth. But he's just there's no way of knowing what happened before the singularity, because it's like, go ahead.
And I definitely, I just, for the record, I mean, this does not really have anything to do with the talk anymore, but I was in the exact same position you're in today, where I was kind of like, okay, if we were all created, then what does that imply? What does that mean? And ultimately, you know me, I am a Christian. Ultimately, I made that decision based on some other things after I decided intelligent design was a viable option.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of free to do some other investigating.
Sure.
And one of the books I actually ended up reading was called The Kalam Cosmological Argument. And don't ever invite me on the show to talk about that book. It is way out there. But the three questions it proposes are, if the universe exists, was the universe created? If the universe was created, was it created by... I'd have to read it. It's been so long since I read it. Was it created by someone who actually cares?
Mm-hmm.
If it was created by someone who actually cares, what does that mean for us? And so those are the three. I think those are the three questions that book asks. And then it goes into, it's actually, what is it? It's a old Middle Eastern philosophy is what it is. And so it addresses those three questions using Middle Eastern philosophy. It's really interesting. And it was kind of the next step after I came to these conclusions. Okay, what are the implications of this question? What does it mean for morality? What does it mean for, everything else? And it was a harder step to go that direction, because I could have gone in two directions. I could have said, okay, could be aliens, and I could stop thinking about it.
Right.
I mean, once you make that decision, you don't have to think about it anymore. But if it was a god, now I have to think about all these other implications that comes with, which is ultimately what I ended up doing. But
right. Well, that is actually a topic that, I think we'd have a lot of fun talking, but, we're well out of time today, and it sounds like you'd like to give your voice a break.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've been listening to Jake Hinton here on Radio Wasteland as we've been discussing intelligent design. So now, Jake, you can go give your voice a break by yelling at your children.
Yes, and I will.
All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, Chauncey. This was a lot of fun.
Welcome to the